So the recording will be available, hopefully, through me. And we also have a YouTube channel, so we hope to put it on our YouTube channel as well. So yeah, I'm going to turn your, there's our president, Karen, as well. So I'm going to stop your video also, just to make sure that we have enough bandwidth and everything for everything and don't have any problems. So yeah, so we'll go ahead here. So hello to everyone on Zoom and a warm welcome to all who are joining us tonight. My name is Christine Costello, and I am the current AMS membership coordinator, and I'm happy to be your host for tonight's presentation. I would like to give a brief biography of our presenter tonight. So, Robert Rogers resides in Edmonton and is also a current member of the Alberta Mycological Society. Robert was the past vice president of the Edmonton Mycological Society for 8 years. And during his time as vice president, the Edmonton Mycological Society became the Alberta Mycological Society. And moving forward, Robert saw the memberships grow from 82 members to 600 members. So quite a difference there. Robert Rogers has been an herbalist for over 48 years and is a professional member of the American Herbalist Guild. He earned a Bachelor of Science from the University of Alberta, where he is presently an assistant clinical professor in family medicine. Robert is also a faculty member of the School of Western Herbal Medicine at Pacific Rim College. He is the author of 52 books on medicinal plants and fungi of the boreal forest. And here, I'll show you 2 examples that I have of the books. This is the Fungal Pharmacy here. And another one that I have that is available is this one, a field guide to medicinal mushrooms of North America. So it's kind of like a little pamphlet. And for your information, currently the AMS has this book and this pamphlet available for sale. And usually we have these available for sale at special events and at certain forays as well. His latest book has been published in October of 2021. The title is Psilocybin Mushrooms, The Magic Science and Research. This book is the topic of our presentation tonight. Now, in order to keep our presentation flowing, any audience questions will be answered at the end of Robert's talk. It is probably best if you add your questions to the chat box during the presentation, and we will hopefully be able to address all of the questions that you might have afterwards. Thank you, and I will now pass you on to Robert's presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share screen here, and so we can get into a PowerPoint. Everybody see that? Is that pretty good? Are you seeing that at all?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can see it.
Okay, so I titled this Psilocybin: A Brief History simply because these mushrooms, like many, had been around for a long time. And when we go back into the, how do I put it, the ethnomycology of the psilocybin based mushrooms, it's a long, long history. I mean, we can look at different parts of the world. There's pictures and pictographs and cave drawings and pictures from, 12 to 14,000 years ago in Australia. There's this Algerian cave painting that was found that's around 11,000 years old. And you can see from the look of this, this is a shaman very much looking like a hornet or a bee with all of these different mushrooms all over the body. And that is due to the fact that honey and psilocybin mushrooms have a long history of use. That is the greatest use of how to preserve rather than just dry these mushrooms, was to pop them into honey. And of course, this was very, very common in all parts of the world. We're talking the Mediterranean, we're talking India, even Sweden has an old, long history going back over 1,000 years ago. And of course, ancient Greece, there is even reasons to believe that mushrooms played a role, perhaps not in the mysteries of Eleusis, but certainly were used in different kinds of medicinal wines. And there now are showing evidence that there are beers that were made thousands and thousands of years ago that actually contained this very active entheogenic compound. Of course, the people who really made a lot of use of this mushroom and are well known for it were the Mayan and the Aztec cultures of Mesoamerica. And before the invaders from Spain back in the 1500s, these ceremonies that involved chocolate, usually a chocolate taken in some form a few hours before, and then honey and mushrooms taken in large groups, where there was a ceremonial celebration and a shift of consciousness associated with a number of these different psilocybin containing mushrooms that of course really did not sit well with the Spanish invaders and the Roman Catholic priests that came along with them to actually try to convert everyone to their form of Christianity. Seeing people having these psychedelic type of experiences and all of the things that were around that were well recorded. And there are a number of very interesting books and treatises out on the subject that I discuss in my book with regards to some of the observations that were taking place. Again, here's noticing, this is another one out of the Aztec pictographs, and I picked a couple of these that are easier to see. Some of the very interesting pictures are more difficult to discern, very colorful, very amazing, and there's a number of great books on that particular subject. Along with these mushrooms, of course, there developed a whole tradition in Mesoamerica, including into Colombia, into Peru, other parts of South America as well as into Honduras, Guatemala. And the most interesting thing was this collection of mushroom stones. These were actually carved, and there's been over 100 of them that have been found in different countries and prized by collectors, of course. But you'll note from the look, I mean, obviously there was a celebration of these mushrooms that really was a deep part of the civilization for a long time in that part of the world. And of course, that's one of the people who really was involved in that was a couple of authors that really recorded it and then took some of these back. And one of the codex of all of these works are actually found in a library in Austria, where scholars are still able to go and look at the recordings that were done by some of the Spanish priests. So there we are back in the 1500s, and now we're going to move ahead and we're going to move into the middle 1950s. And this is a picture of a very interesting curandero, Maria Sabina, and Gordon Wasson. Now, Gordon Wasson was a very interesting character. He married a Russian woman. He was a well-to-do New York banker. Some of his life was a little bit dubious, to say the least, and with regards to how he earned his incomes and things. But he was tipped off by a number of people that there were actually mushrooms in a central part of Mexico that created hallucinogenic effect. And he became very intrigued by this. And so back in the mid-50s, he made his first journey, and then one with his wife and his daughter, down to visit Maria Sabina. And on his third visit, he actually was able to ingest the mushrooms and take part in what Maria called a velada, which was involved ingesting the mushrooms, pairs of them. I think it was like 16 or 32 that were also taken while she did a lot of chanting and in the right setting, the right set and setting, which is very interesting because today, as we'll move forward, use the use of psilocybin for a number of very important mental health issues. The set, that is what is created, and the setting, how people feel, and then the setting they're taking these mushrooms in is incredibly important as part of the therapeutic value. In 1957, he came back and he wrote a book. He wrote an article for Life magazine in May of 1957. And it's pretty interesting. The same Life magazine, one of the editors in there coined the word magic mushrooms for the article. And that kind of has stuck through time. As soon as that copy came out, and then about a week later, his wife wrote an article in another magazine. And so millions of people were exposed to this idea that there are these mushrooms in Mexico that can get you high. And so a number of people made the journey. And back in the early 60s, it is rumored that many people, including Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, John Lennon, of course, Bob Dylan, and a number of other musicians wended their way down there wanting to know what this was all about on a recreational journey. However, they're more than that. So as I say, the set and setting, this is a great book, Maria Sabina, Her Life and Chance by Estrada, who was related to the family, and also translated by Henry Munn. And this is well worth a read if you can get it from the library, and it's a very interesting book. So what Wasson found is he found that these mushrooms, he ingested them, and then he took some with him back to the United States, and then he wanted to know what was in them. And so he thought, well, who else could I send these to except to the famous Albert Hofmann? And Hofmann, of course, was the Swiss biochemist who was most well known to that point for his discovery of LSD-25. He found from ergoty rye, he found this molecule, didn't know much what to do with it. It sat in a shelf for a few years. And then one day he took it out and accidentally or on purpose, who knows, spilled a little bit on his hand, and then took the very famous bicycle ride back to his house, and hence on the adventure began and the whole story of LSD. And basically Wasson, through some other intermediaries, sent samples to a Roger Heim in Paris who grew the mushrooms. And in those days, a lot of the mushrooms that were grown were, for example, Psilocybin MCKENNA, which actually has some utility in the sclerotia, not as much as in the fruiting body, but also you can grow them like little tubers. And he actually was able to analyze and identified the molecular structure of psilocybin and psilocin. This is kind of important because actually it is well known that psilocybin, even though it is the main compound that is now utilized synthetically in a lot of the clinical studies of late, psilocybin converts in the body to psilocin, and that is, of course, the ingredient that actually has an effect on the serotonin receptor in the brain that creates the effects that are utilized by the body. It's very closely related to serotonin. In fact, the molecules are very, very similar. But anyways, Hoffmann discovered them. And then, of course, he was able to synthesize them. And he was working for a company called Sandoz, who quickly made use of the fact that there's this new chemical for psychotherapy and psychiatrists, and they started to market that, and it became very, very quickly available to a number of different agencies, which we'll talk about in a minute. At the same time, a little later, there was a very interesting fellow called Terence McKenna. His brother Dennis still is a very well-known ethnopharmacologist. UBC has been working with psychedelic and hallucinogenic plants and mushrooms for a long period of time. But Terence was, they were both born in Colorado, and Terence and his brother Dennis, they went off to Colombia one year back in the, I forget, it was the late 60s maybe, and they were looking for a particular plant that contained DMT, a very potent hallucinogen. But when they got there, they found a whole field full of Psilocybe cubensis, these large mushrooms that are the main ones grown in factories today. They're one of the easiest psilocybes to grow. They get to a good size. In fact, I saw a picture a few months ago of someone who had one fresh cubensis mushroom weighing 450 grams. That is a big mushroom. And the two of them wanted to share all of their information about these mushrooms, which they ingested and enjoyed. And then they came back to the States and they wrote a book. And the first one was self-published. And then the second one was picked up by a publishing company, and it sold over 100,000 copies back in the day, and basically told people how to grow this mushroom in jars, basically jars of grain, like very easy to grow. And of course, from that point on, things really started to take off. Shifting a little bit, Terence then, of course, went on to share a lot of his philosophy about mushrooms. And one of the great ones is his so-called ape theory, which involves the fact that perhaps one of the reasons that there was a large leap in the brain size, but also the ability of the brain to actually work on a more lateral method, increase the eyesight, was that hunters on the savanna of Africa found in these little ungulate mud pies these mushrooms growing. And when they ate them, they found that not only did it improve their visual acuity, making them better hunters, and thus they could be, reproduce much more readily, and therefore but they also could begin to form thought patterns and images that are associated with the beginnings of communication and speech and things of that nature. It's a wild theory. I kind of like it. It does explain a lot of the evolution of the human brain and its origins out of Africa and the different kinds of stages leading up to the present Homo sapien. At the same time, back in the day, Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert were at Harvard University. And they found that they could order because they were psychiatrists, they could order the synthetic psilocybin from Sandoz, from the pharmaceutical company, and they started to do these, numbers of different journeys with people. One of the more famous ones was done in a church where there was significant benefit, although I would say Leary did fudge the results a little bit, but people who were involved in it, even 20, 30 years later, said it was a very, very important spiritual moment for them. And so they were basically went from that stage. Then they started to, of course, look at the other hallucinogens of the day, including LSD. And at some point, Leary crossed the line a bit and Harvard kicked him out. And I think Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass, he left as well and went their own journeys. And of course, Ram Dass turned out to be, went to India, contributed a great deal to a lot of awareness of different transcendental and yoga and things of that nature. And Timothy Leary went off with a few people up to a resort in suburban or in upstate New York. And in this particular really gated community, began to carry on and do more investigations. And, of course, there was raids by the DEA and all kinds of crazy things went on. And then, but there were some serious investigations into the possibilities and benefits of psilocybin in those times, in the late 60s, beginning into the early 70s, that was really showing some really a lot of promise for a lot of particular depression, anxiety, things of that nature. But then again, good old Richard Nixon showed up on the stage, declaring Timothy Leary one of the most dangerous men in America. Ridiculous. But he also encouraged, and Congress passed a law, and then they actually went to the United Nations. And the United Nations in 1971 passed a law, basically, that said that no more research on hallucinogenics could be done anywhere in the world, if you can imagine. And that set everything back for the next 25 years. No research could be done. There was some great work done by Ebrahim Hoffer and other colleagues in Saskatchewan with LSD. All of that information and research was all shut down and basically went into the dark ages of psychedelic medicine. And I also say it's a damn shame when politics gets in the way of good science, and that's exactly what happened. However, things have changed. In the last, in the mid 1990s, Dr. Roland Griffith and his friend and colleague, his name escapes me for a moment, Richard somebody, the two of them actually applied, and it took them 3 years to get through Harvard, and then the FDA and the DEA, and they finally got approval for the very first human clinical trials that were conducted. And of course, all of these studies, beginning with that one, all used synthetic psilocybin so that it could be medically accurate, so to speak, a kind of a single molecule drug trial. And it was so successful that the first one was amazing. It was actually around 30 people with stage 4 cancer who were given a single dose of psilocybin in a controlled setting. And they all experienced incredible kinds of awareness and connection and empathy and things of this nature. In fact, 1 year later, when they were sent out a follow-up questionnaire, many of them said it was the most single important event they had ever had in their life. Now think about that. So anyway, since that time, there have been over 100 human clinical trials to date. Dr. Robin Cathcart Harris in England, in Imperial College, Roland Griffiths and colleagues at Johns Hopkins have been central to it, but now it's expanding. And there are more clinical trials associated with for anxiety, treatment-resistant depression, and for very chronic depression. Very successful trials have been done. Post-traumatic stress disorder. There are trials that have been conducted on different addictions, including nicotine and alcohol. There's one now on cocaine that's presently happening, as there's 70 more are scheduled to come online for 2021. And those results, of course, we won't see for another 6 months to a year or something like that. But the evidence is overwhelming that the psilocybin has this ability to really help, with assisted psychotherapy, really help people who are suffering from a lot of these mental and emotional health issues. There are lots of initiatives. For example, in Oregon last year, in 2020, Oregon passed a Measure 109 psilocybin proposal that passed, and now it is up to the state legislature. They have 2 years in order to figure out a way in which they can make that legalization happen. Like, how is that going to go? How is that going to be done? They've been charged with it by the population of Oregon to figure this out. And since then, there has been decriminalization in a number of different cities in the US, a number of different states. California just passed a month ago, are going to put one on the ballot for 2022 in fall, called the California Psilocybin Initiative. And they are going to push for not only medical psilocybin, but also for recreational. And if people want to use it for religious reasons, it's going to be non-taxed. So there's some wild things starting to happen out there. And one of the things that's really interesting is that there are over 200 species of psilocybin containing mushrooms worldwide. Many of them are in the Psilocybe genus, but also the Paniolus. And they all really have different ratios of psilocybin, psilocin, baeocystin, aeruginosin, and other compounds that actually many people believe, including myself, they act in a type of an entourage effect where it may actually be more beneficial and needs to be proven, of course, with trials, that the compounds derived from the real mushroom may be superior to the synthetic psilocybin that is now used in clinical trials. That's going to be a challenge for a lot of governments around the world, including the Canadian government. It's worth noting, though, that there's been over 30 people have been approved in Canada who are in various stages of cancer threatening their lives, have been given exemptions to grow psilocybin mushrooms for themselves in their own house and ingest them. And more and more people applying. I think only 30 have been approved, but there's over 200 applications that have not been touched yet, and probably held up a bit by the election. We'll see how it goes from here. But the reality is that there are a number of companies sort of joining the gold rush, like the cannabis gold rush 8 or 10 years ago, positioning themselves to either grow or do the clinical trials associated with psilocybin, DMT, other compounds that are of what I call the entheogenic nature, but some people call hallucinogenic or psychedelic. And the gold rush is on, and some of these companies are way overvalued as people are rushing to put their money in there. And we'll see how this all shakes out over the next few years. There probably will be some winners and losers and shakeups in the industry. But if you want to just check it out, you can go down to Jamaica, man. In Jamaica, both cannabis and psilocybin are perfectly legal to grow, to ingest, to carry around, to take care. And in fact, you can go into different places and you can go to Ted's and get mushroom tea, mushroom punch, mushroom soups, things of that nature. Very, very common. And because it is one of the places in the world, there's a few places, countries, Samoa, Nepal, those are a little bit more difficult. But in Jamaica, now I think British Virgin Islands and St. Vincent, I believe, are now setting up laws to allow these to be grown for economic purpose, of course, but then the clinical trials can take place utilizing the real mushroom or extracts from the real mushrooms. Here's another one. There's a lot of companies that are set up in Jamaica, including one that I'm involved with, for full disclosure. One of the people down in Jamaica who's helping out is my friend and colleague, Trad Cotter. He has one of the best, I think, organic mushroom growing books out on the market. A little plug for him. And here we are in 2005. There's myself enjoying a Myco beer, Trad on the right, and then John Holliday in the middle at the back there. John Holliday was previously the owner of Aloha Medicinals, and now is going around the world, setting up mushroom grows, including psilocybin, all over the world. And so he's got quite an expertise with regards to how to do this properly. Growing mushrooms in your closet is one thing. Growing mushrooms commercially on a large scale, that's another whole giant, kind of an issue. But they can be grown commercially. Look at the mushrooms growing here out of one bag, just popping out of there, just huge. But is big better? This is a great question, because basically when you look at them, and here's some other ones. Normally when we think of psilocybin mushrooms, we think of them a lot smaller than this, and percentage wise, the content is very, very similar. So if you get large mushrooms in a grow bag, you get a few. If you grow them and you get a whole lot of small ones, there's not a whole lot of difference, really. Storing them is kind of an interesting thing. Best way to store them at the different temperatures, that's all interesting. Probably some of you are interested in that. The best way to store them, one thing that mushrooms don't like is they don't like temperature change. They don't like heat. They don't like oxygen, things of that nature. And they don't like to be stored in fridges or freezers either. So something to keep in mind. And then this is a little, we'll skip over that. But I wanted to show you, here's a recent study that just came out last year. And they did a study comparing psilocybin with a well-known drug for treating depression. And as you can see here, this is particularly for moderate to severe major depressive disorder, which is really, really, I believe the latest statistics I read is something like 40 million people in North America who actually fall into this category, 40 million people. And very often, many psychiatrists have come to believe that for anxiety and depression, many of the drugs that are used really do not really solve the problem. They just mask the symptoms that are going on. And in this particular study, there was a distinct difference. Basically, very similar outcomes, but there were none of the side effects associated with the drug. And I think more and more we're going to see this happening. Certainly at the University of Alberta, there are studies that are being geared up to take place in the first quarter of 2022. And here's kind of how it works a little bit. One possible mode of activity. The psilocybin, as I said, is converted in the body to psilocin, and then it hits the 5-HT2A receptor. And that really is the sweet spot for this particular compound. And one of the things that's really been found about it is that despite the idea originally, and this was, I think, Cathcart Harris in Imperial, they suggested that it was always thought that when you took magic mushrooms, that they would somehow scramble the brain, that they would actually cause all kinds of, and that's where all of these visuals came from, these patterns that people experience, things of that nature. But what they actually found is that what occurs is that the psilocin actually stills the mind. It's almost like, I think the best comparison to suggest, particularly with things like OCD and post-traumatic stress, is that it stills the mind. Just like when your computer, you just can't, something's screwing up in it. What do? Last resort, you stop, you turn your computer off, and then you turn it on again, and it resets itself. And that's what they found, is that actually it resets the brain and the way that people feel about not only themselves, but some of the experiences that they've had that may have led to different traumas in their life. I mean, we all talk about post-traumatic stress, but just about any childhood incident can be a trauma if it has not been addressed properly through time. And so we're finding now that it actually helps to reset the brain, reset the mind, so that it actually can lead to decreased depression, anxiety, and other mood and related anxiety disorders, which are usually the source of the addiction. The addictions are an attempt by individuals to bury down, to mask down, to kind of allow them to cope with these emotions that they have no other way of dealing with. And so addictions and anxiety, depression, all of these things are totally related. One of the things I want to show here is this is a little bit about the entourage effect, about how things are perhaps utilized. And some of these we don't even know. For example, aruginocin does also affect the HT receptors, but has no hallucinogenic activity. And so that particular compound is not as researched as some of the others. Some people may wish not to have the full hallucinogenic experience, or and so millions of people, millions of young people particularly, and others are now microdosing in North America. There are courses on how to do it. It's not that difficult. Basically, a microdose is about 1/10 of the normal dose that would be taken for a general hallucinogenic ride. And so microdosing has become very popularized. One of the dangers of microdosing is that it can become sort of an addictive behavior, just like, the things that it's trying to cure. But however, this particular aspect is becoming more and more popular. There are beginning to be clinical trials associated with this. Another thing that I think is really interesting is that there are unique delivery systems. There are now people associated with not just ingestion of mushrooms, but also the ability to put them into forms so that they can be taken intranasally. Or a couple of companies now have sublinguals that actually can be put under the buccal of the tongue for quicker release of the actives right into the system. And it's going to be big. I mean, right now we're talking about both functional and medicinal mushrooms, and also mushrooms associated with psilocybin. And the numbers and the counts are going up exponentially. You know, a $500 billion market by 2028. That's only 7 years away. And so there's some significant, this is a study that you can pay money and get this study, by the way. And just last week, I noticed that there was a Newsweek came out, a new treatment for depression. So this magazine hit the market October 1st. On the weekend, I saw W5 on CTV. They did a half-hour, very favorable story on psilocybin, where they actually interviewed people who were at the end of the rope, and they took the mushrooms under guided supervision and had amazing insights, allowing them to really look at death in a way different manner. So I think the whole thing is really becoming interesting. During therapy, people are utilizing different forms of music. I think that helps to set the setting, so to speak. Having people in the right mood for that. Aromatherapy actually has a role to play in this as well. And I think that it is a new direction that is going to change the way that psychiatrists and psychotherapists work. One of the things in the W5 episode that was interesting was that because it is, quote, illegal in Canada, there are a number of psychiatrists and psychologists who are basically risking their professional accreditation by helping people with the mushrooms in a guided setting. And so it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I will end this with, I wanted to show you, this is a book I just put out a couple of weeks ago. I worked on it for a while. Psilocybin mushrooms, the magic, science, and research, and where I go through in a lot more detail about all of what we've covered here in very, very short manner. And I cite over, I think over 100 of the studies. So in the bibliography, so you can actually check out for yourself the study, how many people were involved in it, what did it show, what were the more details for those who really like those kinds of things. And so I think a time has come. I put it out on, I think October 5th or 6th or something like that. And it's really receiving a favorable reception on Amazon.com and Amazon.ca. And people who are interested can delve into it a little bit more. I think I'm going to leave it at that so we have a little more time for questions. So just give me a moment and I'm going to click out of my PowerPoint here. And yes, and now I'm back. Good. So I'm sure there are possibly a few questions there. Did we get any in the chat here?
Well, thanks very much for that, Robert.
You're welcome.
We basically only have one question so far. So, and it was from Lori Walsh. And she's asking, on the topic of universities and research, for many other drug substances, you can sign up to volunteer for research studies. Is there a similar type portal to sign up as a research participant for psilocybin? Let's get research back on track and make up for lost time. I'll be a clinical trial guinea pig. And Deborah Golding also says, I would join you in a clinical trial as well.
Yeah, there are going to be actually clinical trials right in the Edmonton area. coming up in the new year. So everybody can keep in touch. When those trials are available, people will be well apprised, and there will be opportunity to be part of them. No question about it. Yeah. One of the things right now is the fact that the Canadian government still is insisting that the trials be utilizing synthetic psilocybin, and so that may change. I'm involved with a company that is actually going to grow psilocybin mushrooms for the market. And so that's another whole story. But the trials themselves can precede that actual indication by using synthetic psilocybin to begin with. And it's going to happen. There is a professor at the University of Alberta, I'm going to keep his name anonymous right now, but is going to, and a world famous psychiatrist who is going to be, has put together a team to do these studies. Yes.
Okay, next question is from Garnet. And he asks, where can we buy your book other than on Amazon?
The only other way to get it is from me, unfortunately, at the moment. And that's a bit of a song and a dance. I have a website called my online store, I guess a shameless promotion here, www.self, S-E-L-F, heal, H-E-A-L, distributing. That's all one word, selfhealdistributing.com. There's a website there, and you can see all 58 of my books and 7 of my wife's, and that's the way you can get it and avoid Amazon.
So the next question is from Denny Manzer. Does adding the mushrooms to honey do anything more than making them tasty?
That's a great question, and I've often wondered why, but I do believe that actually the real reason honey was involved is that it's the perfect preservative. It prevents oxidative stress, so that the full compounds in the mushroom, which are put into the honey fresh, preserves all of the active ingredients. Of course, it makes it tastier, but I don't think it adds anything with regards to the ability of how it's taken up by the body. No.
So another question from Garnet, is there risk of overdose? What are the risks, dangers of these mushrooms?
Right. So there are no recorded deaths. There is a risk of taking a very high dose for those who are not used to that kind of adventure. There are also a number of indications that are used in clinical trials. For example, they will not permit anyone who suffers from hypertension, because initially when the mushrooms hit the system, there's a real rapid cortisol spike, and it could cause a very temporary increase in hypertension, and you don't want that in people who are prone to that. It also is contraindicated for people with any schizoaffective disorder in the family. It's contraindicated for people with epilepsy at this point. Although there are other studies that suggest that may be useful for things like migraines, very useful. So there are some contraindications that people should be aware of, yes.
Mm-hmm. And the next question is from Holly Mahovich. Could these mushrooms be tinctured? And would the tincture hold the same benefits?
Absolutely. Yeah, they can. In fact, any of you who are interested in herbal aspects, the Canadian herb conference that's coming up in November, one of the participants, Todd Caldecott, great herbalist out on the Powell River in BC, he's going to do a whole talk about making how he prepares psilocybin tinctures. If you're really interested in that topic, that's a great workshop to catch.
Okay, the next question is from Mel Hone. there is still a lot of negative stigma in regards to magic mushrooms. How would you dispel that when talking to the average Joe, besides pointing them to the studies you've already mentioned?
That's a great question. I really think that is the whole issue. In fact, there are many health professionals who have actually been educated to be fearful of magic mushrooms, who were actually taught that they're a dangerous product. And I think it has to start there. I think there has to be a really good conversation among people truly looking at the real science behind this. And that is the reason why it actually has somewhat exploded. The whole area of this is because it really is, compared to other compared to pharmaceuticals, it is a very, very safe product. The one caution always is that people should, when they're doing this, use it in clinical trials or under supervision to get the optimal experience. And I think one of the great books that I really thought was really useful for the average person was Michael Pollan put a book out a few years ago called How to Change Your Mind. And here he was, 60-year-old, taking it pretty much for the first time. I think he did a little bit when he was in his 20s, but took a serious dose of psilocybin and relates this experience. And he writes it in a way that's really useful for the layperson, suggesting, so How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan is a great book. That's what you can get in paperback now, and people can read it. And I have all kinds of people who are, I'm 71, people who are my age and older go, this is amazing. So I think the window is opening up. I think it's a matter of just people talking among themselves and sharing. And as we get more successful clinical trials, it'll just become time of day.
Okay, another question is from Garnet. Is there any consideration around the cultural aspects? Are there concerns about appropriation?
That's a great question. I love that. Well, as a matter of fact, there are different thoughts on the pattern. The very fact that today they're done in very clean clinical settings, very nice settings, nice music, nice lighting, beautiful coach, things like that. But there also is this idea that perhaps the best way to approach a sacred mushroom like this is from a more shamanistic perspective, that is utilized in a way that really brings into its fullness the whole idea of using it as part of a growth journey, as part of a manner in which people who are having difficulties with mental patterns can readjust and move forward. And so I really am, in terms of appropriation, these mushrooms grow all over the world. So I don't know how that would be, relevant to some degree. I will say that it was a damn shame that the Spanish came into Mesoamerica and they wrecked basically destroyed a culture. They killed 90% of the people who were living there at the time, and destroyed some of this, so it had to go into secret. I think the mushrooms want to be shared by people around the world. They found their way around the world, and the mushrooms, not only because they have the benefit of helping people with their own health, mental illness challenges, but as people get better and they get more connected to nature and more empathy for themselves and others, it may well save our planet. It may well help us to more people to understand that we are all one, we are nature, and that ecology and environment are the number one issue. And I think mushrooms show a great promise for doing that.
So that's all the questions we have on the chat. I don't know if you want to maybe have people unmute their mics perhaps and ask questions, or how would you like to do it?
Well, they can, or they can pop it in, or maybe they've heard enough of me. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's an area worth exploring. And, you know, even if, you know, you just have a general interest, I think that watch over time in the news, you're going to see more and more articles about how governments are going to be challenged in North America with how to address these issues. The cat is out of the bag, so to speak, and it's time for the only people that really should be worried, I think, about this this whole new industry that's popping up around these mushrooms is the pharmaceutical industry. They make massive amounts of money on selling anti-anxiety and antidepressant drugs that really aren't that effective.
So do we have any other questions from anybody?
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you setting this up, and I hope everybody got a little bit of something out of this, and thank you again.
There was a comment. Thanks, Robert. Much appreciate.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. So lots of thank yous and everything. So
maybe by next summer I'll be able to join some forays with the rest of the AMS crowd here and there. And it's one thing to go out and foray on your own, but it's nice to go out with other people. So
definitely, yeah.
So everybody stay safe this winter, and we'll see you next year. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'll end this then. Good night, and thank you very much.